All right. All right. Welcome, folks. Welcome to everybody to this webinar. I have the pleasure to have, I think, one of the most influential people on product. Marty, thank you so much for being with us. If you'd like to introduce yourself for those who might don't know you, but I believe that most people recognize you from any, either from your book or from your webinars or for your talk. But if you wanted to give a quick introduction about yourselves, that'd be great.
Oh, well, good to see everybody. The name is Marty Cagan again, and I have been doing product forever, feels like, for a very long time. I only work on technology products, no beer or clothes or things like that. So, I work with pretty much every kind of tech product, and have had a chance to work with a lot of different teams really all over the world. So I've been writing about that, and I advise and coach some teams. That's pretty much my day job.
Awesome. Thank you, Marty. So just to try to for set up the logistics, and the idea is that we are going to go through all the questions that the people have been submitting before the webinar. And if you have any other question, guys, put it on the chat box. I'll be take them all up, and if we have time, we're going to be try to answer those questions. So just let's jump in straight into the things. You have been you have been writing quite a few this week's, Marty, on your blog post. And one of the topics that I really like the most, and you have been also writing some entries, is about a strategy. And you mentioned that strategy or product strategies require choice, thinking, and effort. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the main thing that I get frustrated with companies is, and I'm not exaggerating, most companies I meet, it's not that they have a bad strategy, they have no strategy, literally no strategy. They have some objectives like grow the business or reduce churn rate, things like that. And then they have a roadmap of features. And that's it. And of course, your objective might be your big goal and your roadmap is tactics, but they have literally no strategy. Right. Now, this is a big difference between good product companies, because in good product companies, the strategy is right at the heart of what teams do. Now, so I've always been interested in why so many companies don't know anything or do anything really about strategy, even if they know about strategy. And I think it's because strategy does require doing some things that most companies don't like to do. It requires them to make hard decisions about what they're going to work on and not work on. That's the choice thing. And most companies, if they bring it down to 20 things, they think they're focusing. So they don't really understand what it means to focus. Right. They also don't really understand the level of sort of thinking that's involved in order to come up with a good strategy, which is normally based on insights. And those, thinking is not one of those things that companies really talk about. Are we skilled at thinking? But it really is right at the heart. And it also points a light, shines a light on the fact that most of this thinking needs to be done by the leaders, and a lot of the leaders are not actually doing their job. Right. So it requires serious thought and thinking, and it also, this is a lot of work. Doing strategy is a lot of work, and you have to actively manage that work, especially because a lot of managers think their job is to just sort of back off. They think that that's what Agile means, is less management. But of course, it doesn't mean that at all. It means better management. So those are things that most companies that are not very good at. And so I guess it's not much of a surprise why they're not so good at product strategy.
Exactly. Exactly. But for example, let's suppose that for example, like a brand new product manager in a company. I goes to these kind of all hand meetings where we are supposed to, get the job or define the job for the teams for the next 3 months. What should I see in order to say that is, there is a good session where we can get what all the teams are supposed to do, rather than, as you're saying, complete, for example, a backlog full of features and get to work for the next 3 months, and then meet again in the next quarter to define or do again the same process. What are
Yeah.
the signs that I should see in order to say, hey, we're on the right track here?
Well, this is going to quickly turn into a discussion on culture and culture of a company. What you're describing, those companies that just have these big all-hand meetings every quarter or even every week, that is not what I encourage. I don't like that at all, and I don't think that's very helpful. I would argue what's really going on is because the leaders there are not doing their job, it's just kind of decision by committee. Let's just get everybody together in a room and see what people will sign up for. And instead, what really needs to happen is those managers need to be sitting down with the product teams one-on-one, each product team, and talking to them about how they need to help in the strategy. How can they help in the strategy? There's an occasional meeting where they need to share what that strategy is, but that's it's not about meetings. And if I find a company that's trying to do all this with meetings, then there's usually bigger issue going on.
Right. And one of the things that I really like is you also mentioned in your talk that companies, for example, like Netflix, Apple, Amazon, they all have different kind of cultures, but even though they have different kind of cultures, the way that they approach, product strategy is completely different from the rest of the companies.
Right. Yeah, culture is a tricky word because it means a lot of things, but I'm referring to meeting culture here.
Right. Got it. So another thing that is quite related to strategy, and I think that is also you have been very, very vocal about this kind of thing, especially when I had the chance to see your talk about empowered teams. How important is to have like empowered teams when it comes to define a strategy or not? Because I've seen, for example, as I said before, in some sort of meetings or companies that they think the strategy equals to OKRs or team objectives, and they throw those to the teams, thinking that they have like empowered teams just because they have objectives and key result. But usually that's not the way, right? So
Right.
what is the importance of having empowered product teams for that?
Well, and there's really two topics there. One is, does the company have an actual product strategy? And like I said, most don't. But it's also true to say that you can have a product strategy and not have empowered teams. A lot of companies do that, actually. They have a product strategy, and hopefully they have a good leader, an experienced leader, but then that leader, there's really two ways to give work to a team. You can give them a roadmap, or you can give them problems to solve. The strategy tells you what problems need to be solved. In the empowered team model, the team figures out the best way to solve that. In the command and control model, the executive figures out the best way to solve that. So obviously, I'm all about empowered teams, but still, you can have a strategy and not have empowered teams. What I would argue is it makes no sense to try to do OKRs unless you have empowered teams. That's what they're for. And the biggest, I'm starting to lose my voice here. I've been talking a lot lately. Sorry about that. But the biggest problem I see with companies doing OKRs is that they don't have empowered teams. Literally, the executives are giving the teams roadmaps and objectives. And hopefully everybody understands that that's just makes no sense.
Right. So how does, and based on also on your experience of on the companies you coach and your advice, what is an empowered team? You have to define it like, besides the fact that they're solving problems, but what are the things that make up really a team very very empowered, truly empowered?
Well, the basic test for an empowered team is, do they get to figure out the best way to solve the problems they're asked to solve, or does somebody else figure that out? That's the basic idea. Now, obviously, in an empowered team, they get to figure out the best way to solve problems. However, in order to do that, they need some things. They need a true cross-functional team. That means product management, user experience design, and engineering. It doesn't just mean front and back end engineers. There's people with all kinds of goofy ideas of what a cross-functional is. The biggest thing that's missing for most of those teams, if I'm truthful with you here, is product managers. They have product owners, but they don't have product managers. Mm-hmm. If you have a product owner and not a product manager, or if we say your product manager is not actually doing the job that they need to do, then you really have almost no chance of being an empowered team. So that's the part that's missing in most companies. Well, two things have to happen to move to empowered teams. One is you have to have these people with the skills. And like I said, normally the biggest issue is the product manager. And the other thing is the executives need to give them a chance.
Yeah. Two ideas comes to mind. The first one is that, as you said, and you have been reinforcing this idea also with some of your series on your post, which is the series on coaching. And I think that what you're saying, that the leaders give the teams the chance, or the product managers the chance, is they also have to be someone who coached the product manager specifically on the things that they need to do, and different, at different levels. Is that what you mean when you're saying that leaders needs to give them a chance?
Well, let's say you just have somebody on your product team. Maybe they have the title product manager, but they're just a product owner. They're just a backlog administrator. They are not helpful in an empowered product team. Well, you can either replace that person, right? Find somebody else, or you can coach them. And my first choice is always to coach them. Most of the time, in my experience, they can be coached. If you realize that person just has no chance, then you'll need to replace them. But most of the time, they can be coached. And so I have been spending a lot of time writing about how do you coach somebody to become a good product manager, or frankly, a good engineer or a good designer. It's the same thing. But product manager is more of a problem because there's only one product manager on a team. It's not like engineers. And if that product manager is not capable, you've got a big problem.
Right. Even though you can have a really, really good strategy, if the product manager is not suitable, or is
right,
the right person,
they won't execute.
Right. The other topic that I really caught my attention when you started to talk about empower team, and I think this related also to the fact of the product manager, is trust. Trust in which sense? Because I think that is not only trust from the product manager, but from the team, overall. Is that accurate, or?
Yeah, well, I mean trust in two main ways. The first is, and when we talk about empowered team, the main purpose of trust is with the executives. The executives need to trust the team, the product manager in particular. If they don't, they're not going to let them figure out the solutions to the problems.
Right.
They're going to just tell them what to do. The second kind of trust is with your own team. Because if you're trying to actually solve hard problems, it does take product design and engineering working together. And that requires trust between the members of the team.
Right. So it's a two different levels, not only
Yeah.
with the leaders, but also with the team itself.
Yes. It's still trust, but we're focused on different people.
Right, right. So what are the main traits of trust? I think that you mentioned two normally. Competence from one side, and the other one is character.
Right.
I think that competence is more related to the skills, right? From that the product manager should have, or the
Right.
on the skills that he or she should be coached.
Right.
But when you talk about character, what are you referring to specifically?
Well, for example, a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot, sometimes we have people on a team. It could be an engineer, it could be a designer. The most common time I see this as a problem is a product manager,
Mm-hmm.
where they are basically jerks. And the rest of the team does not feel comfortable working with them. They don't feel like they can do their part. The designer is not comfortable. The engineers are not comfortable. And the executives around the company think that this person is arrogant and, not interested in working together and has their own agenda. So this kind of person is a real problem on a product team. And so that's what that's referring to.
Right. Right. Got it. Got it. I was thinking, in processing, how is the state of the art here in Spain, and one of the other things that you also talk about is like, specifically the way that sometimes Agile has been brought into the different teams, and how that fits into the culture of the companies, and how seriously sometimes people takes Agile, and how passionate they are about that, about executing that. In your experience, and I think that I have the chance to ask you about this, but I just wanted to bring it to the conversation, just to try to all the people hear your opinion. What is your opinion on this kind of stuff about Agile, product companies working in Agile, product companies that become very very passionate, that they sometimes they lose sight of what they have to achieve, but they rather focus more on doing the process rather than achieving the objectives of the outcomes that they should achieve. What is your take on that?
Well, I mean, of course, it's a complicated topic for sure. In general, though, if we look at Agile as a set of processes around delivery, I always, every company I work with, if they are already using either Scrum or Kanban or Sunblend, and if they're not, I really try to encourage them, you need to do this. Now, when a lot of people say Agile, though, they don't really just mean that. They mean something much broader and fuzzier. And that's where it gets tricky. I've pointed out for years that lots and lots of product teams use Agile methods for delivery, but they're not Agile in any meaningful way. They're not Agile. That's just the truth. They might be following Scrum or Kanban, and they should, but that doesn't actually make them Agile, especially if they're given quarterly roadmaps.
Right.
So I try to separate those two things. Now, the other thing you get in there's two things that really complicate things and make it messy. One is there are a bunch of processes out there that are not at all Agile, but they call themselves Agile. The most famous is SAFe. That is just marketing. There's no Agile there in any shape or form. Right. So that I try to help teams understand what that is command and control. It's waterfall all over again. And if your managers don't understand that, all I can say is find a company that has smarter managers, because that is ridiculous. Right. The other thing we have, even when they're not using something like SAFe, is they have oh, what was I going to say about that? They have Agile religious purists in the company that are, anytime you're religious about process, it's dangerous. And I try to get these people that's not really helpful, especially when they don't know product or design. So many of the Agile coaches out there do not know anything about product and nothing about design. And so they can't really coach a product team. All they can coach is some engineers on the team. So we have to be careful on what those people are doing and whether they know what they're talking about or not. Some of them are great, but it's hard.
Yeah. So and just I have a question here that people are pretty interested to ask you. But before that, just to try to close this this topic, I think that one of the things you mentioned in order to try to avoid focusing too much on the Agile from the delivery standpoint is that product discovery can help us a lot. With that, combining a dual track or whatever we want to call it, but doing discovery can help us a lot. And I was revisiting the other day some of the slides from your workshop, and there's a thing that you mentioned there that regarding the not the velocity, but what is the pace of the different things. So in discovery, you mentioned that you need to experiment. I don't remember the exact numbers that you said, but could you tell us a little bit, just to clarify the two different tracks for those people who are interested in knowing discovery and delivery and how they're supposed to go or to be done?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're each trying to answer different problems. For delivery, of course, we're trying to build a scalable, reliable product that we can ship to our customers. For discovery, we're trying to figure out what to build. So neither discovery nor delivery is a process. What it is it's just an activity, and we have many processes to do each of those. So there are many kinds of discovery processes. Fundamentally, discovery is about how do we figure out a solution to the problem that we've been asked to solve. The way I like to describe that is we need solutions that are valuable, usable, feasible, and viable. And the main way we do that is with prototypes. And there's no purpose in building a product in order to find out it's not even what we want to build. So we build a prototype. And we have many kinds of prototypes, 4 main kinds of prototypes. And so every good team I know is skilled in the kinds of prototypes and how we create them and how we test them. But because we're using prototypes and not product, discovery goes way faster. It's obviously going to go way faster. We don't have to worry about quality assurance. We don't have to worry about scale and performance. We don't have to worry about internationalization and localization, none of those things. We just basically are trying to answer those questions. Normally what that means is about 15 to 30 prototypes a week. And that's not hard to do with the tools that are out there, but that's obviously much faster than delivery. But it's not a race, obviously, right, between discovery and delivery. They're not racing. They're just trying to do different things. Right. So the reason we like the techniques in discovery is because we can very quickly figure out if something's worth building or not.
Right. And that is where the concept of the MVP, comes into place, I guess. Yeah,
MVP is just another name for one of these prototypes. That's all. I don't like to use the term MVP so much anymore because it's very confusing to people, and most people think it's one thing, and it's not. It's many different things. It's just the fastest, cheapest way to test out an idea. So they're almost always prototypes.
Yeah, even though you might know at the end that some of those prototypes are going to be thrown away. right?
No, you do know most of them will be thrown away, just like MVPs, right? So,
Right.
um, yeah, we know most are going to throw away. That's why we don't want to build a product.
Right. Exactly. Um, I wanted to. I have to come back to product strategy, Marty. There's some, there are a lot of people asking. I think it's a very tricky question. Um, how to create a product strategy, or how to come up with a product strategy? What do you need? What do you need to create a product strategy?
Well, rather than try to answer that, I just published a whole series of articles on it. And so it would take me over an hour to explain
Explain.
those to you. But just go to the svpg.com, and there's a whole category product strategy. And it will walk you through the whole process that I encourage. At least it's not a process actually, but there are things you need to do, and it's hard, like I said. But that's how we do a product strategy.
Great. Another question related to discovery is product discovery different from each problem and solutions the team would like to validate? If so, would you recommend to the product managers to build a plan of activity that he or she will be doing during this solution discovery?
Well, the only thing I'd be a little nervous about is it sounds an awful lot like a process there,
Yeah.
and I'm allergic to process. So be very careful about process. It is true that discovery is different for everything, because that's just starting with those four risks: value, usability, feasibility, and viability. They're going to be different for everything that you're considering. So we would start our work in discovery by figuring that out. I mean, I should mention too, I wrote an entire 300-page book on discovery. That's called Inspired. And if you haven't done discovery before, that's why I wrote the book. So there are many different techniques: quantitative techniques, qualitative techniques, many different kinds of prototypes. That's what's going on. A competent product manager is choosing the right techniques for the job. Sometimes it's super easy and you just go forward and put it on the backlog. Other times it's very complicated and risky, and we have to do a lot of prototyping.
Right.
So it's always different. Is it useful to do a plan before you get started? Sometimes, only for the really big things, but sometimes.
Yeah, and there are other resources that I think that you always point out to, which is, for example, the opportunity solution tree, like the one that Teresa Torres is always encouraging us to use. We can help to try to understand how to orchestrate, well, not to orchestrate, but to go to and discover the different opportunities that can, and validate those with experiments, solutions, and they're very useful, by the way.
Yeah, there's a lot of techniques. The technique you're referring to is a framing technique. It helps us think about our work. And then we have lots of other techniques too, including some planning techniques when planning is called for.
Right, right. I have another question. Is modern product manager the essence of agile product management? I don't know how to frame it, but
well, I don't know. A lot of people use the term agile product management and it means nothing useful. So I don't know what the person actually means by that. Because a lot of people, what they call agile product management is just the product owner role.
Yeah.
The product owner role is not product management. That's the administrative part of the job. So without a definition of agile product management, it's hard to say if what they're thinking of is modern or ancient.
Yeah, yeah. Man, we're having a lot of questions. Another one that we got from the audience, Marty, is what are the main differences between product management, especially when you are in a B2C company or in a B2B company? main differences that you need to, for example, let's suppose that I'm a PM of a B2C company and I'm switching to a B2B. What are the main things that I should, care about when I'm doing this move?
Well, it's honestly, it depends if it's a good B2B or a bad B2B, because most B2B companies are terrible. That's long established. They're terrible and they do terrible products. And however, if it's a good B2B company, then interestingly, the difference between product at a B2C company and a good B2B is not very different at all. In fact, the main strategy in a good B2B company is called consumerization of the enterprise, that basically you should build products for businesses the way you build them for consumers. It's a much higher bar in a consumer company. Yeah. I also find it easier to do B2B products. Usually we don't have to go hunting for our customers, and it's not that every user is the buyer. There's a lot of things I find easier, but that's only at those good B2B companies. I wish there were more. There are some great ones today. And 10 years ago, there were hardly any. Salesforce was good, but there were very few. Today, there's more, but most B2B companies are not well run from a product perspective. They're really sales driven, and it's often a leader from sales. And so that leads to a whole bunch of bad behaviors in product organizations and product results. Right. So, but if you talk about good B2B companies, there's actually very little difference today. And the differences are in your advantage. They're easier.
Okay. I have another question here. Any advice on how to measure progress in the discovery phase? We are super used to scaling metrics, and I find them not useful for the discovery phase, but I would love to have a way to track progress.
Well, I never try to get people to think of discovery as a phase. Discovery is what product managers and designers with engineers do every day, just like delivery is every day. And it's easy to have measures of velocity, just like silly things that engineers do with story points or velocity. You can do just as silly things for discovery. You can talk about the same kind of things, like how many prototypes did we do this week? None of that really matters on delivery or discovery. What matters are results. Right. So the way we measure results are our KPIs. If you're using OKRs, then you have clear key results. And if you're not using OKRs, you still have business results. That's how we're measuring. So that's the only thing that matters. Right. Everything else it's literally called a vanity KPI. So it makes us feel better, but it's not what we're there to do.
Yeah. Would it be, for example, the number of prototypes that we have tried, as you said, for example, in a week? I don't want to say like a leading indicator, but something that to keep in mind when you are, in that phase of discovery, or is it still like a vanity metric?
Well, I mean, there's no question it's a vanity metric, because that is not a business result. In fact, you can do 100 prototypes in a week and still have a terrible product. Right? That's why it's not a business result. Right. I don't want to be religious on this. When a company has never done discovery before and they're moving to this model for the first time, it doesn't bother me if a team says, look, we're not used to doing any prototyping. We're not used to doing any testing. So maybe we're going to have a goal for ourselves to do 10 prototypes this week. Right. Fine. I would say that's fine, as long as it's temporary. Right. And, again, it's just like getting focused on process. That's not the point of this isn't 10 prototypes. The point is, if you do 10 prototypes, then hopefully you'll figure out 2 to 3 things that are worth building. And those things will work. Right. That's the point of all the prototypes.
Right. Got it. There's another question here. It seems that I have been seeing a lot of new open roles for product with a real sales perspective. Is that kind of the new demand or specialization for product people?
I'm seeing that question. I've seen a lot of open roles for product with a real sales perspective. I don't know what that means. I'm not sure what that means. If they're saying, that you should really understand the business, that's great. Mm-hmm. If they're saying that you should be coming from sales, I've never seen that. So I'm not sure. That might be a translation issue. It might not be sales. It might be with a business perspective.
Right.
If that's what the question's really about, then yes, that's a big part of a product manager's job.
Got it. Well, I think that you have also mentioned the difference between the product manager and product owner. But besides managing a backlog, anything else that you would like to see, you would like to say about the product owner?
Well, I see that question there. There's confusion, and it's worth talking about because it's such a common problem. We have to separate also the actual baggage that's associated with the terms from the actual role. When I say that a product manager job is much bigger than the product owner job, first of all, I say that the product manager should be the product owner. But just to be clear, product owner is a role on an Agile team. Product manager is the title of the person on a product team that is responsible for value and viability of the solution. So the product owner responsibility is just a little part of the job. I mean, literally, it's like 5 or 10% of the job. Now, the other big thing here is whether we're talking about a real product team or we're talking about a feature team. Because most companies, they have feature teams. They're just there to implement roadmap items, in which case you don't need a product manager, and they wouldn't even, that there's no need for a product manager. All they really need is a product owner and somebody, it might be the same person, willing to be a project manager. So feature teams are not my focus, even though that's what most companies do. They have what I call feature teams. So when I say what's the difference between a product manager and a product owner, I'm talking about the difference between an empowered product team, product manager, and the role on an Agile team, which is a product owner. So if that concept is new, there's an article called Product versus Feature Teams that spells out the difference. And that is a real problem, I've found. And it's a problem all over the world. It's a problem in the US, it's a problem in Europe, everywhere. So.
Right. Yeah, I hope it's clear. Someone just copy the link on the chat. Thank you for that. Another thing, Marty, you mentioned that when you were referring to the kind of Agile coaches. So some of the things that we have heard here is that we know now with this kind of lean wave, saying that we need to be continuously improving. We need to we should apply continuous improvement. All these kind of things that we heard in a product team. Do you advise, for example, having some people, external persons, go into the product team, trying to help the team to get this kind of mindset of continuous improvement? Or do you think that it's also like a responsibility of the team, or the product manager should be also responsible at some point of doing this kind of stuff? What is your advice on that? I mean,
well, all three of those, or both of those are possible, but you didn't actually mention the normal answer in a good product company. The people that are actually coaching the product managers, designers, and engineers are their managers. That's normally the first responsibility of the manager of product managers, is supposed to be coaching the product manager. The manager of design is supposed to be coaching the designers. And the engineering manager or dev manager is supposed to be coaching the engineers. Right. And that's that's one of the most visible differences I see between good companies and the rest, is the role of their managers and how seriously they take coaching.
Right.
So that's the main answer. And the second answer is, if they have, like I said, there's nothing wrong with having an agile coach, but it's rare that those agile coaches know anything at all about product and design. There's a different kind of coach called a discovery coach that focuses on product and design, just like a typical agile coach focuses on engineering. So I don't really care, as long as you do have to make sure, though, that person knows what they're doing.
Right. Yeah, but that thinking about that brought me to the point of saying, yeah, I might have some managers who coach me, but the problem is that if we have this, like a vicious cycle where those people who are coaching me have never gotten any good coach themselves, they are not going to be able to do that. And let's suppose that some typical PM from a team see that, for example, that dysfunction, and this is maybe some bottom-up approach, I don't know, but how do you, from your perspective, can I do something about that?
Well, you're describing, I would say, the biggest problem in companies that are not doing well in product. The reason they're not doing well, it's not because of the teams directly, it's because the managers have never seen it done well themselves. And so they don't actually know how to do this, and so therefore they can't coach their people. So they don't do a product strategy like we talked about before. They don't coach their people. They don't even know the right people to recruit for the jobs. Yeah. So this is, I think, the biggest problem in our industry. We use a term here, the blind are leading the blind, right? That they don't know. And that is, that's what I've been trying to focus on, that problem, for the last year. I'm trying to give help to these managers that have never done it before, never seen it. I mean, if you're lucky, you work for a manager that used to work at Amazon or used to work at Netflix, and they know how to do this, and that's great. But if you're not, then what do you do? And so that's what I'm trying to focus on. I think we need to, as an industry, we need to really tackle that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So the advice for those product managers, because I've seen in other companies that people have been working almost in the same company, they have been escalating to, say, the corporate ladder. They reach a position where they have like an executive position, but they have never seen any other reality out there. So basically, your advice is to try to ask for help, right? Ask for help for someone who outside who can give you that information or background that you need, right?
It is. I mean, I don't want to depress you or anything, but a while ago I wrote about an anti-pattern I see, which is, I do meet a lot of startups, and almost, unless a startup is pretty good at product, they don't get to product market fit typically. Mm-hmm. So usually the ones that grow and get to product market fit are doing something right. But what often happens is when they get to product market fit, they also attract the attention of the investors, the VCs. Mm-hmm. And now they get a bunch of money, millions of dollars of money. And what many of them do with that money is they go out and they hire some big name executives. And when I say big name, I mean from like a big company. But they don't hire the ones from places like Amazon or Google. They hire somebody from, Oracle or something like that. And those companies don't know how to do product. And so you can have a company that was good at product that now starts being bad at product. Yeah. And that, I really think, is a sad state.
Got it. I encourage people to keep posting questions. It's been great. So we have to. You mentioned the feature roadmap, product roadmap. So I would say that like 90 something percent of the product companies are doing roadmaps. There's no, I wouldn't have any doubt about it. There are very few that might be doing, in the very well. Let's suppose that my company is doing roadmaps. What those roadmaps should look like to try to say, hey, don't become like the typical feature factory, but rather try to solve, customer problems.
But you're asking what exactly? How
my roadmap should look like, rather than saying, ton of features.
Yeah. Well, look, there's the only real problem with roadmap is that when you call it a roadmap, if the rest of the company thinks it's commitments. And so we get in trouble because of that. We're locked in. Again, we lose that any real sense of being agile at all. And we also, the reality is that most of these ideas don't actually work out. So there are a couple things you can do. One is only provide a roadmap after you've done discovery on a solution. There's nothing really wrong with that. It's just that the roadmaps are not very far out, right? They're only weeks out instead of months or quarters out. Another thing you can do is try to get your company to move to what's called outcome-oriented roadmaps, which is instead of putting the features on there, you put the goal on there, which is fine. That's fine. I don't really have. That's basically OKRs. It's just a different format. So that can work too. But it's a long process to wean your company away from roadmaps to empowered teams. It takes some time, and it's that change we were talking about. So everybody has to pick their battles, but there's no question to me that most companies use roadmaps, which is why most companies, I said, you have feature teams.
Right. Yeah, it's like a consequence, right? You're gonna have, feature roadmaps. The consequence, you're gonna have feature teams.
Right.
Got it. So we have a question related to that. What does a business development team or a CEO tells investors if there is no roadmap when customer asks, when are you doing a feature XYS?
Well, customers, it's normal for people to ask about features, and they ask about features often because they see it on competitors' products and stuff like that. And so whether you should actually build that feature is the harder question. It's a conversation I've probably had 1,000 times with customers, where I will call them or visit them in the case of big things and say, I want to know what you're trying to do, because I want to make sure that what we do actually solves that for you. And that's really what your customer is trying to figure out. So the real answer is easy with a board. You say, yeah, we're going to solve that customer's problem on June 1st or whenever it is. That's what they care about. It's just sort of shorthand to say, when will you have that feature? Notice this is really a problem in B2B companies, not B2C companies. And that's one of the reasons, like I said, it's so typical problems.
Yeah, being there. So going back a little bit to the outcomes roadmaps that you mentioned, some people are asking about what is your prioritization technique? Do you have any favorite prioritization technique when it comes to prioritize, I believe, these kind of outcomes?
Well, the most important thing to point out is if you've moved to outcomes, it's a lot less about prioritization. Most people talk about prioritization in terms of what's the priority of these features? How do I order them? But when you're now moving in outcomes, you're talking a much higher level of abstraction. And the prioritization of those outcomes is not up to the product team. This is up to the leaders. And really, it's a function of the strategy, the product strategy. So I try to tell teams, if you move to the empowered team model, it's not about prioritization. It's much more about just focus. Now, and we typically, a product team has one or two problems they're trying to solve. It's not a lot of problems. So prioritization is kind of a non-issue.
Right, right. There was some person asking about suggestions for getting closer to customers in B2B. What should you actually do to reach out and talk to some of them every week? I think that is related to, interviewing or continuously interviewing pro discovery.
Well, the question, as I see it, they're a little worried. They know it's very easy to go out and talk to customers, and you need to do that every single week. The question was saying, though, sometimes salespeople feel like they are the only ones that should talk to customers, and they're very protective of that. And that's, that's not that common, but I have definitely seen it several times. And this is one of those times where we do need to sit down with the head of sales and maybe even the CEO and explain that it's critical that the product teams have direct access to the customers. And we also explain to the product managers that they have to respect the salespeople and the fact that they're based on commission, and they need to understand what's difficult about their job. But let me just say it's non-negotiable to have direct access to customers.
Right. Yeah, as long as you are not, you are making clear to the salespeople that you're there to try to help them rather than to take the piece of the cake. Absolutely. Do you think that the current product managers need a more analytical mindset to find problems based on data, mainly B2C?
Yes, I do. Even for B2B, for product people today, good understanding of data and analytics is critical for product people. It really is. So many of the techniques that we have are based on data.
Got it. Any particular recommendation about trainings or technique that if you're starting, for example, with product analytics, you can look on?
Well, I have a book I love called Lean Analytics. It's in the Lean series, and I think it's probably the best one in the Lean series. And so that does a good job. And I usually recommend to product managers that have never had a data course or something to read that book. Also, if they've never had a course on statistics, they should. Yeah.
Good. Perfect. We'll put it down with the resources. Any tips on slicing problems techniques?
Slicing problems. I don't know what that is.
I don't know either. But I believe splitting problems, maybe breaking into smaller problems. Wow. Let's go with this one. What skills do product managers lack the most in general? Oof.
Well, I would say to do the product management job on an empowered product team, you really need four big things. One is deep understanding of your users and customers. Second one is deep understanding of the data. It's what we were just talking about with the analytics side. The third one is where most of them get in trouble, which is deep understanding of your own business. And I mean understanding what each of the stakeholders are responsible for, what they're concerned about. So for example, it means you have to understand how your product is marketed, how it's sold, how it's paid for, how it's funded, what the monetization strategy is. You have to understand the privacy issues, the ethical issues, security issues, sales issues. This is a lot. And this is what most product managers, this is really why if the product manager does not know these things, the executives are going to view them as a feature team product manager. Yeah, and the fourth one is deep knowledge of your industry. Um, yeah, that you're in.
Got it. Got it. Um, just to try to close in before we close, last questions. Um, some person was referring to the outcome-based roadmaps. I understood from a previous comment you made that you're okay with setting or committing to a deadline timeline to solving a customer problem. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's called a high integrity commitment. If you just Google the term high integrity commitment, you'll see how we do that. Just because we don't like roadmaps doesn't mean that we don't need to commit to dates at specific times. Every company has to.
Right. Great. So, Marty, I just want to say thank you so much. We are close to the hour. Anything in particular about training things, blogs, articles, besides the SVPG series that you would like to recommend to people? Training maybe that you're gonna give. Well, difficult now with the whole global situation, but any resources that you think that could be useful for the people on the webinar.
Well, I think there's a lot of good resources out there today, a lot of good books. Um, I am a huge fan of Ben Horowitz's books. He's written two now. Uh, and this is really for the people on the call that want to really be great at product management, not just product owner. And, I did see a lot of reference to the term product owner. That is, you don't want that on your LinkedIn profile. You want product manager on your LinkedIn profile. So just, it's not impressive to tell somebody you're a product owner.
Right.
I want to make sure people have a high bar for that. So yeah, Ben's books so are great, and in every topic there's good stuff now too. And I would say, one of the things about product people is it's constant learning, just constant. That's if you don't like learning new technologies, learning new techniques, product is not a good role for sure.
Right. There's someone asking that if a new book, you're releasing a new book this year, or?
Well, I'm working on a new book. That's why there's been so much published lately too. I need to
Okay.
get more out there, and but it won't be out. I'll finish it this year, but it won't be on the shelves till next year, early next year.
And just a quick sneak peek on what is going to be about. It's the
Well,
main
it's
topic.
about what we've been talking about. It's called Empowered.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, ordinary people, extraordinary products. That's the title.
Great. Marty, again, thank you so much. It's been a huge pleasure. Hopefully we'll see you soon with all these kind of virus goes away.
Yeah.
But thank you so much again, and have a really good day.
And thank you. Appreciate it. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Cheers.